Hello, my name is Preeti Emmerich, and I am the Director of the Anne Arundel County Office of Emergency Management. Anne Arundel County is facing some challenging times, being in a global pandemic, but also facing an active hurricane season. That is why Anne Arundel County has designated this week as Hurricane Preparedness Week, where my staff will offer tips on better preparedness, response, and recovery to ensure that all residents of Anne Arundel County are safe this season. I'd like to introduce Brianna Craggy, my Training and Exercise Coordinator, who will moderate this week's discussions. Brianna?
Good morning. I am Brianna Craggy, and I am the Training and Exercise Coordinator for the Anne Arundel County Office of Emergency Management. Starting today, we are offering citizens a full week of information focused on being better prepared for tropical storms, hurricanes during the ongoing pandemic. This brief interview will provide information and practical tips for being better prepared for hurricane season and for any disaster, whether as an individual, household, or neighborhood. So before we talk about preparedness steps, I'd like to ask our OEM recovery planner, Joseph Seborowski, who is also a trained meteorologist, to give us an update about the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season.
Thank you, Brianna. So the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season, the hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th, with the more active period being in September. When the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration issued their outlook in early May, they did predict that we were going to have an above average season. And there was a number of climatological factors they were looking at. They were looking at warmer than average sea surface temperatures. They were looking at reduced vertical wind shear, and then the possibility of a La Nina developing. So all these factors kind of contribute to potentially seeing more storms developing and even more intense storms developing. So the update that was issued actually a few weeks ago did continue to show that we were going to have an active season, 85% chance of above normal season, with 19 to 25 named storms, 7 to 11 of them becoming hurricanes, and then 3 to 6 of them becoming potentially major hurricanes. And I'm sure some of you are aware, we have already had 11 named storms this season, including Kyle that happened a few days ago, and even had Tropical Storm Isaias impact our area a few weeks ago as well. So we are certainly looking at a more active season, with the peak of the season still a few weeks away.
Wow, thank you for that update on the current Atlantic hurricane season. Can you also tell us the difference between a tropical storm and a hurricane and how they form?
Of course. So most of the tropical cyclones that we see start from waves of low pressure that form off of the African coast. So as these waves of low pressure move across the Atlantic over warm waters, they start to develop into tropical depressions, which eventually can become tropical storms and hurricanes if they progress and they continue to intensify and develop. So as they move westward across the Atlantic and they pick up speed and intensity, once they hit the threshold of 39 miles an hour, it will become a named tropical storm. And then if it continues to develop with all the factors that help enhance a hurricane, as soon as it hits 75 miles an hour or greater, it becomes a Category 1 hurricane and then continues from there.
Even though a tropical cyclone may be weaker than a hurricane, it may still produce dangers that we will need to be aware of and prepare for. So what are the different categories of a hurricane, and which ones do we need to be on the lookout for in Anne Arundel County?
Of course. So whether it's a tropical storm or a hurricane, it has various hazards that are associated with it. But as far as a hurricane goes, the National Hurricane Center looks at the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale, and it does issue a number of different hazards that are associated with a Category 1 hurricane versus a Category 5 hurricane. So even though a Category 1 hurricane is a little bit less intense, it still can produce those hazards, whereas the Category 5 hurricane ends up being a more catastrophic potential hurricane. And we do see those from time to time. They're not as frequent, but all the Category 1 and Category 5 are potentially dangerous hurricanes regardless of their strength. And anything above a Category 3, which is 110 miles an hour or greater, sustained winds, is classified as a major hurricane. So again, a Category 1 to Category 5, it can potentially be dangerous.
Can you talk about some of the hazards that tropical storms or hurricanes can impact Anne Arundel County?
Absolutely. So there's a number of factors and a number of hazards that we look at when we are dealing with tropical storms and hurricanes. They're typically the sustained winds and wind gusts that are associated with tropical storms and hurricanes, storm surge, tornadoes, and inland and coastal flooding. So even though a tropical storm or a hurricane may have whatever the sustained wind factor is, wind gusts are always a potential concern as well, because this can lead to down trees, down power lines, and even structural damage. So even though a tropical storm may have 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts or sustained winds, we could still see higher wind gusts with some of the bands that move through. Storm surge is another big concern, especially with the shorelines of Anne Arundel County. This leads to abnormal water increase along the shorelines, so any areas along the shore can certainly see coastal flooding. There can be inundation up to a couple of feet, which can certainly encroach on houses in different parts of the county. Tornadoes are not uncommon, especially in tropical storms and hurricanes. Sometimes you have a little spin up that can produce a very brief and a weak tornado, but it's still enough to do some potential damage. In the case of tropical storm Isaias, there were a number of tornado warnings issued along the eastern shore and down in southern Maryland, so it did produce a little bit of damage there. And flooding and coastal flooding especially. So we can certainly see several inches of rain fall in a very short period of time, which does lead to flash flooding. Even in case of Isaias, it was a fast-moving storm, but we did see several inches of rain come from it. In some of our more slower systems, we could see several inches up to a foot of rain potentially. So these are all very important hazards to keep an eye out for when we're dealing with tropical storms and hurricanes.
Thank you for that valuable information. So can you tell us the difference between a hurricane watch and a hurricane warning?
Of course. So with the watch, a normal watch, when we ever talk about severe thunderstorm watches, tornado watches, those are always indicative of the potential to see those hazards. So it's the same thing when we talk about tropical storm watches or hurricane watches. They're looking at conditions favorable to see sustained winds within a 48-hour period. So in the case of a hurricane watch, we're looking at maybe seeing 74-mile-an-hour or greater sustained winds within a 48-hour period. So that's when a watch is issued. So that's the time to be prepared and continue to monitor forecasts. And then when a warning is issued, it means that at some point they've observed these winds reaching that criteria, reaching that threshold, and that's the time to especially be taking action. So it's the same as when we're talking about a watch and a warning. Watch means conditions are possible, and a warning means conditions are happening.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Brianna.
Prepare today for tomorrow's storm. Like most natural hazards, hurricanes are potential disasters we can plan for today to be better prepared with common sense measures that could happen tomorrow. If you have any questions about today's show or have any interest in a virtual preparedness presentation, please contact the Office of Emergency Management at 410-222-0600 or visit us online at www.aacounty.org/OEM. Please remember to follow us on our social media accounts. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Nextdoor, as we offer more tips for hurricane preparedness and the ongoing pandemic this week. If you have any questions regarding the coronavirus pandemic, please call the County COVID-19 phone line at 410-222-7256. This is Brianna Cracky with the Anne Arundel County Office of Emergency Management, thanking you for joining us and urging you to prepare today for tropical storm and any other natural hazard. Thank you.